Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
Welcome back to Your Dog's Friends webinars. Today's webinar is about reactive dogs, and we are very fortunate to have as our speaker, board-certified veterinary behaviorist and certified trainer, Dr. Leslie Sinn. Dr. Sinn's practice, Behavior Solutions for Pets, is located in Ashburn, Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. Please put your questions in chat. We will hold them until the end because some of your questions may be covered during the talk. And the other thing I want to mention, some of you also may not realize that Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit and that our free services, including these webinars, rely on donations. So please consider donating. Go to the homepage on our website and you'll see a donations icon in the upper right corner. We appreciate any amount that you feel capable of donating. I think we are all going to learn a lot today. This is an update from Dr. Sinn's earlier reactive dog webinar. And Dr. Sinn, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate the intro and welcome everyone. Thank you for showing up. I feel quite frankly very flattered because it looks like it's one of our last pretty days in the fall. So thank you for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a pretty busy Saturday to listen to this presentations. Hopefully you'll find it valuable and worthwhile. One of the reasons why this topic is near and dear to my heart is because, quite frankly, it's an area that many of our clients seek help with. So today we're going to be talking about the reactive dog and hopefully give you kind of an overview, let you know about techniques that you can use to help your reactive dog, and ways to move forward in the future in terms of getting your dog to a place where he or she is a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more at ease. So with that, let us go ahead and get started. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, as Deborah said, I am a veterinary behaviorist. My clinical practice is located in Ashburn, Virginia. The bulk of the practice is dogs, so lots and lots of dogs. We see other animals as well, cats and horses and pigs and things like that, but the bulk of the practice is dogs, and a huge number of them are reactive. So as I said, this topic is near and dear to my heart. So let's talk about reactivity a little bit. What do we mean when we say a dog is reactive? We mean that their response to a stimuli is above and beyond what is indicated by the stimulus itself. So something common every day and an over the top response to that thing. So basically the mere presence of the stimulus is enough to cause a response in many situations. You may also hear people talk about stimulus, refer to it as a trigger. So those terms are used interchangeably. Stimulus, trigger, basically something that sets the dog off and their response is excessive or over the top. You know what I'm talking about, because I'll tell you what, every single neighborhood has at least one of these dogs. They're barking, lunging, growling at everything and everyone, so very annoying. But even more embarrassing if it happens to be your dog who's the troublemaker. You know, the looks that you get from the neighbors and strangers as you're attempting to simply get your dog down the street for a potty break. It is makes you want sometimes for the ground to kind of come up and swallow you. So pretty embarrassing. It can be a very vicious spiral in the sense that because it's so embarrassing and so difficult, you may begin to avoid walks, and the less exercise, lack of stimulation is likely to make the dog more antsy, potentially more reactive. Walking decreases, the problem increases, and you're sitting there wondering why it was that you got the dog in the first place. When I talk to my clients, the vast majority of them gotten the dog as a companion. They have a vision in their head, the expectation in their head of it being a social extension for them, being able to go out in public, being able to go on walks, being able to go out with friends and their dogs. And that may well not be happening with a reactive dog. So it can be kind of very disconcerting for a lot of people. How many of dogs are reactive? How common a problem is it? Well, as I mentioned, in my practice, a dime a dozen, huge number of dogs are affected. We're not really sure about the exact number because, believe it or not, no one has looked at this problem in the pet dog population in terms of a research perspective or a research project, but just an informal poll amongst trainer colleagues, people that work in the DC metro, Maryland, Virginia area. It's very, very common. So our guesstimate is 50% or more of dogs are reactive to some extent. So you are not alone. What does it look like? What is reactivity? How does reactivity manifest itself? Well, classically, it's barking and lunging. But you've got all kinds of variations on the theme for sure. Growling, whining, shaking, staring, spinning, stiffening, hackles up, drooling, some situations cowering or planting, refusing to move. Worst case scenarios, you may have seen it as a dog that actually leaps up into the air, and the leaping may be so frantic and so intense that they actually flip themselves over, landing on their side or their back. Bonus points for you if redirected aggression is involved. Basically, the dog gets so aroused, so worked up that they start snapping and grabbing and biting at whatever's closest to them. And in that situation, it could well be you. So owner-directed aggression is not uncommon. In this case, it is redirected aggression. The dog is not specifically targeting the owner. The owner just happens to be the closest thing to the dog, and that's what he or she grabs hold of. So it can be very scary and potentially dangerous. Dogs can be reactive to many, many different stimuli. So a particular dog may have a single stimuli or trigger, or it may be triggered by a lot of different things. Typically, dogs are a target common source of reactivity, but there may be other things, such as other animals. This time of year has been just hellaciously difficult for people who have dogs that have any interest in rodentia, so squirrels, birds, cats, foxes, and now the deer, because the deer are in rut, and so we are seeing more of them, making many of our dogs basically lose their cool, lose their marbles. Dogs can also be reactive towards people. Frequently, they're more worried about kids, whom they often seem to perceive as a completely different species because of the way they move and talk, screech, scream, and play. Dogs are also much more likely to be worried about men, who are bigger and occupy more space and consequently tend to be more intimidating for a dog that's anxious or worried. So they are more frequently a reactivity target. Vehicles, anything that moves fast, such as cars, buses, or trucks, especially if they make odd noises like UPS and FedEx delivery trucks. Personally, many dogs are not a fan of the new beeping noise that the Amazon trucks now have. So that's ended up being a trigger for some of my clients' dogs. And then wheeled objects like skateboards and bicycles, strollers, electric vehicles, that kind of thing, may also set them off. So that's just an example. Dogs can be reactive to other things as well, but I was trying to think of some other examples. Wheeled garbage cans are one of the ones that set off some of my clients' dogs. So garbage day is often hell day for those clients. As the dogs hear the neighbors dragging the wheeled garbage cans down the drive, makes them react and go nuts. Why does leash reactivity occur, or how does it develop? Well, it could well be. Let me back up. We don't really know, right? Because we can't put these guys on a couch and analyze them, ask them how they're feeling, what's going on. But our best guess is as follows. So there's several things that may contribute to it. It could well be a protective mechanism. So if the dog is worried or anxious in any form or manner, they may revert to the best defense is a good offense approach. So basically, stranger danger, stay away, bark, 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 bark. And that's the reactivity aspect of it. Approaches towards dogs are behaviorally inappropriate in our busy suburban and urban environments. Traffic, sidewalks, the way our houses are set up, leave absolutely no maneuvering room. And consequently, the approaches are direct, head on. If you ever have the opportunity to observe dogs off leash playing in a dog park or out and about, you'll notice that they do not approach each other head on. They do the head to tail circular approach in order to diffuse any aggression or tension and to get a better feel for each other before they actually make contact. So the head on approach that our urban design forces on us may well predispose the dogs to being more reactive and more worried. If I had $10 for every client who walks through our door and says to me something along the lines of, my dog was fine until he was tackled by the Akita across the street, or my dog was fine until he was tackled by the white fluffy thing down by the pond, or my dog was fine until he was ambushed by the Cocker Spaniel down the street. If the dog has experienced an attack, even though it may not have been a severe one, and the dog was frightened, consequently, the dog may have been traumatized, that can result in leash reactivity. A lot of times we just don't know. We don't know the history if the dog comes from a rescue or a shelter background. But with many of my clients with owned dogs, the history is known, meaning that the dog was managing just fine for a number of years. And then after the traumatic event, now the dog is reactive. If the dog is uncomfortable around unfamiliar dogs, then being out and about and having to walk by unfamiliar dogs on a regular basis or having unfamiliar dogs on top of them could well lead to leash reactivity, especially if dogs engage in inappropriate social interaction. If the dog has poor socialization skills because of the way it was raised, either in isolation or with limited exposure, that environmental background could influence its skills with people and with dogs, and consequently, it may be reactive. We know that anxiety and shyness runs along family lines. It certainly does in people, and we are collecting more and more proof that that is also the case in dogs. So there is a high likelihood that there is a genetic component to shyness and anxiety. Consequently, that may also spill over or manifest itself in reactivity in these shy animals. Dogs that are easily aroused have high arousal levels. These are animals that may become easily frustrated or easily overstimulated. Think herding breeds, think pitties, think some of the lab crosses. Those high arousal dogs can become easily overstimulated and or frustrated on leash, especially, or with a barrier, and that may lead to reactivity. If there's a lack of impulse control, frustration I already mentioned, that can contribute. Punishment may also be a factor in this situation. So if the dog is at all hesitant or the dog is at all worried and the handler chooses to use punishment in that situation, say, for example, you're out walking your dog and the dog sees something that worries him and responds to that with a low-pitched growl and then is punished for growling, that may actually lead to reactivity, because if the dog isn't supposed to growl and the dog isn't allowed to remove itself from the situation, then what choices are left now in terms of behavior for the dog? Often that means escalation and lunging and barking as a consequence or fallout. Learning plays a part. Think about it. The dog is behind a barrier, like a fence, or at a window. Let's use window as an example. The delivery person comes, the dog's at the window, the dog's worried, the dog barks, delivery person comes up to the window, bark, 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 delivery person leaves. Next delivery person comes, bark, 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 delivery person leaves. They've just learned, as far as the dog is concerned, that barking gets scary things to leave or go away. And so learning definitely plays a role in that situation. Many people seem to feel that dogs should, must, whatever, fill in the blank, play with other dogs, and that all play is good. When in actual fact, there are a large number of dogs out there that are socially very, very inappropriate. They come charging up on other dogs, they bowl them over, they run them down, they are very, very rough in their play style. And the recipients of that behavior then may become reactive or worried, associated by being approached by any other dog, because those bullies don't respond to appropriate social signaling. And that may cause the recipient dog to escalate. And then last but not least, not to add fuel to the fire, but there is some controversy about how or if spaying and neutering may contribute to reactivity. And I did want to mention that there is at least one paper out there that would suggest that dogs that are spayed or neutered may well be predisposed or more likely to be reactive. And that's the Kim paper, which came out in 2006, looking at German Shepherd dogs. So for those of you who have any kind of a research bent, who like to look at the data, that might be something to check out. But do you remember, one paper, relatively small numbers, one specific breed. So I'm not sure at this point in time that we can generalize and say that spaying and neutering increases reactivity, but I thought I would lay it out there for you. So as we talk about reactivity, please understand that it is not our goal to make your dog into a social savant or a social butterfly. That is not what's going to happen. It is not going to fix your dog if he or she is dog aggressive, especially if that aggressivity is seen off leash. That tells you that it may be likely that your dog simply does not like other dogs. And you know what? That's pretty common. So again, there's this assumption that every dog should like every other dog, and it ain't happening. I don't like everyone I meet. I bet you don't like everyone you meet. And there's some people, frankly, that I despise. And your dog may feel the same way. Again, genetics may play a role in this. There are certain lines of dogs, certain breeds of dogs that are not social once they reach social maturity. Once they reach adulthood, they are not interested in hanging out with every dog that's out there. So be aware, not every dog is an easygoing, over the top, socially extroverted golden retriever. If you have a dog that is reactive, no, you cannot take him to the doggy daycare. No, you cannot turn him loose at the ice cream social. That is not going to happen. What these techniques will do and what proper training will do and BMOD will do is it'll allow you to walk down the sidewalk without having to have rotator cuff surgery. It'll allow you to take your dog to the vet clinic without having to worry about keeping the dog, 2 blocks away, so that you can actually get appropriate care for your dog. And yes, you can expect to have your dog walk politely by another dog, but note that I have another polite dog without creating a scene. If there's another dog that's barking and lunging and snarling and snapping at your dog, that is asking an awful lot of a dog to be able to negotiate that without having some kind of a reaction to that stimuli. That is very, very upper level and may be an unreasonable expectation. And so in those scenarios, you bail and you get your dog away from there. So here are some questions that you should ask yourself before you go down this path, and so that you've got a pretty clear picture in your head of how severe a problem your dog has, how challenging it's going to be able to address the problem in front of you, and how much help you're going to need. Like, is this a do-it-yourself project, or do you need a little more help and assistance than that? Do you need coaching from a professional dog trainer? Can get outside eyes on the problem that can kind of help you stay on track? Does your dog need medication? How intense an intervention is this going to require? So ask yourselves these questions. Has your dog's response changed over time? As a general rule, unless you do some kind of intervention, they are going to get worse over time. So keep that in mind. If you see that your dog's behavior is escalating or getting worse over time, that's a problem. Can you get your dog's attention at all? Like, if you're out on a walk, or you're out, or he's at the door barking at the neighbor, or charging the fence at the child next door, can you get your dog's attention? Or is that impossible? And how long does it take for the dog to calm down or settle afterwards? If you can't intervene, if you can't interrupt, if you can't distract, if you can't redirect, if the dog's wound and pumped up for hours afterwards, you've got a problem. Can you direct your dog to something else? Can you get it to play? Can you get it to chew? Can you get it to eat anything? If not, you've got a problem. And at what distance is your dog reacting? So is it across a football field? No worries, you've got plenty of distance in order to be able to work with that dog. Is it at a distance of a city street? That may be a real problem, especially if you have no alternative but to walk your dog to eliminate and to get exercise, because you've got no maneuvering room. And that means that the dog's going to be reacting and reacting and reacting and reacting. And so we're gonna talk about that. And one of the bottom line questions is, do you really have to walk the dog? Because if you don't, the recommendation is going to be, do not walk the dog in public spaces until and unless you can get some basic foundation skills on the top. The problem that we run into with most of our clients is that they have no choice. They have to walk the dog because they are in a situation where they don't have a yard, and/or they're living in a townhouse or a condo or an apartment, and that is the only option that they have. And that is a much, much, much more challenging situation for them and the dog. So we'll talk about that a little bit. You want to make sure, so you've asked yourself those questions to try to kind of have a feel for how bad this might be. And before you get started in trying any kind of training intervention, behavior modification, you really, really need to get the right equipment. So what do I mean by right equipment? Nothing punishing to the dog. No prong collars, no shock collars, nothing along those lines. Remember, we just finished talking about how if the dog is worried and or the dog is aroused, punishment will make problem worse over time. You're going to make them more aroused. You're going to make them more worried. And that is not going to do anything about the underlying motivation for the dog. So we want to try and switch to something that at very least is neutral. So something like a head halter. Most dogs have to be trained to a head halter, but it provides you with very good control. A no-pull harness, meaning a harness that attaches to the front, which is easier to prevent pulling with. Something like a buckle collar or a nylon martingale collar. Just be aware that many dogs have been pulled on the collar, jerked on the collar, had people tighten up on the collar. And that happens when their owners are worried or anticipating a problem, and that tightening may now be a trigger telling them that bad things are about to happen and cause the dog to be reactive. Double leashes and or a safety snap in order to give you more points of contact so the dog is less likely to break loose or get away from you. If you're a small person, you probably want to invest on a waist leash so that the dog, you have the leash in hand, but you also have a secondary line running to a belt basically around your waist so the dog can't break away or pull away from you. Definitely a basket muzzle if the potential for injury exists. So if the dog is redirecting on you, the dog has any kind of a bite history. I don't care whether an injury has occurred or not, but if he or she has made contact, you want to have the dog in a basket muzzle for everyone's safety. And because frankly, we live in a very litigious society. And it is not worth the risk to you or your dog to have them out and about without a muzzle in place. You're going to have to determine what kind of treats the dog responds to, because you need something to reward him with for appropriate behavior. It's got to be high value. They have to be able to catch the dog's attention. So usually it means pretty good stuff. Things like meat, things like cheese, things like fish. I can tell you with my border collie, when we're in the house and we're just doing our thing, I need to reinforce some quiet behavior. Kibble works fine. So I have a pocket full of his regular kibble. Outside, when we're out and about, no way, no how is that going to be appropriate reinforcement for him. So he likes string cheese. That's kind of his jam. He is definitely a cheese fan. So believe it or not, one of his favorites is Manchego cheese. So if I want to pull out the big guns, we pull out the Manchego. And when we were working on his rocket recall, I spent a Sunday making mini meatballs out of super fat ground beef. And that seems to be his Achilles tendon. If I really need to get his attention, the mini meatballs will definitely do it. Some dogs are very highly motivated by toys or like even a tennis ball, a tug toy. And if that's the case, if you happen to have a dog that's really into those items, then by all means, you can use those as an alternative. Those of you who have an interest in this or have observed any of this, you know that many of the working dogs, the handlers will use a toy, and the dogs are selected for that high drive, that alternative interest in toys and tug, because it means that you don't have to worry ever about running out of food. You always have the toy, tug, or ball with you. It makes it very easy to train and to reward the dog. But most of our dogs, pet dogs, they're like, yeah, no, they don't have that kind of drive, and you need to find an appropriate reinforcer for them, one that will catch their attention and will work. So this is just an example of a padded head collar with a safety shank on it. You can see that there's 2 points of attachment to this halter for safety. This is an example of a front attachment harness, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. And again, the reason why we prefer the front attachment harnesses is because the dog can't lean in and pull like they can if the attachment were back at between the shoulders. If the leash is attached at the shoulders, then the dog can lean in with all fours. And basically, it's like going on a sled ride with the dog. You have absolutely no control. So definitely with a harness, front attachment is going to be your friend. And thankfully, most dogs will adjust to a harness with very little encouragement. They seem to be readily accepted by most dogs. Okay, so we have evaluated the extent of our problem with our particular dog, how bad we think it might be. We have looked at our equipment and made sure that we have appropriate, well-fitting accoutrements for our dogs in terms of an appropriate collar or harness or head halter and leash and security systems so that we're in good shape when we take them out. And now what are the next steps? Well, so if we don't want the dog barking and lunging, what do we want the dog to do instead? We need to teach them alternative behaviors. So alternative behavior number one is a watch me or look at me cue. And as I go through these various skills, foundation behaviors, whatever you would like to call them, alternative behaviors, let me point out, it sounds very, very simple. And it is a very simple concept, but it is not easy to teach it effectively and get it to the point where it is going to effectively work for you and your dog, because these alternative behaviors must be automatic, often referred to as auto watch or auto check-in, which means it has to be practiced over and over and over again and through varying levels of distraction. If your dog will not look at you when asked at any point in time while you're in the house, then clearly the dog is not going to look at you when you're out and about walking. So think of it like learning CPR. What they have EMTs do and people who learn first aid and CPR is you practice it over and over and over and over again, so that when you're in a crisis situation or a stressful situation, you automatically fall into the pattern because you practice it over and over and over again. So when you're out and about and walking, because your dog has practiced this behavior so many times, as they start to get worried or as they start to see a potential trigger, when you ask them for the alternative behavior, you cue the behavior, they fall into the pattern and they respond. And you have the opportunity then to reward them with the high value treats that you have now figured out are what are needed in order to appeal to your dog in these tense moments. So simple does not equal easy. It requires lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of practice. But it can be done, and it is highly effective when you put in that practice time. So that's alternative behavior number one, the look at me cue. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the actual technique itself. There are lots of different ways to teach a watch me or look at me cue. And I'm sure if you're working with a trainer or you've got a training book or you even go onto YouTube, you'll find a half a dozen ways to teach this behavior. No pros or cons with either one of them. It's just a matter of making sure that you get an automatic response to the cue. Alternative behavior number two is a U-turn or let's go cue or we're out of here. Basically, you turn around and you move away from trouble. So you're walking down the street and you see some happy camper with two fluffy dogs on extended leashes that are flailing around and basically covering the whole walkway. No way you're getting by it. No way they're going to do anything to control those dogs. we're out of here. Let's go. So you're avoiding a confrontation rather than participating in one. We do not want the dog to practice undesired behaviors. That is how you make habits, folks. So avoidance is key in this situation. You can make it fun, move out briskly, kind of like, hey, let's go. Pop a couple of reinforcers into your dog. Pretty soon, again, practicing that over and over and over again, the behavior will be automatic. They will basically whirl in place. I had my border collie switch sides on me so quickly when I cued him on one occasion that I actually tripped over him because he turned before I did. And my feet weren't able to catch up with him. So move briskly, make it fun. It allows you to avoid situations that you just don't need to participate in. And for those of you from the DMV area, I thought you all would appreciate the photo that I included on this slide. I don't know if all of you can recognize him from the back like that, but that is Barack Obama with Bo moving briskly away from the press corps. So I thought all of you would appreciate, after the various episodes that they had with Bo, apparently Barack was well aware about the value of a let's go cue with his dog. So there you go. Happens to the best of us. So that was alternative behavior number 2. So we have a watch me or look at me cue number 1, the let's go, we're out of here number 2. Alternative behavior number 3 is a touch or target cue. Typically, we use our fist or our palm because that's something that you always have with you, rather than training the dog to an artificial target like a wand or a lollipop. The purpose of teaching them this cue is that you can use it to redirect their gaze or their attention. Basically, touch, 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 rather than allowing them to fixate on whatever worries them and start to escalate. So dogs that are reactive tend to go through a specific sequence of behaviors before they actually reach the point where they bark and lunge. Typically, these dogs are hyper-vigilant, so they're scanning their environment, looking for triggers, for scary things or stimuli. Once they see the scary thing or the worrisome thing, they will fixate their gaze on it, often freezing or pausing or starting to pull. And then depending on the individual dog, hackles may come up, and then they will start to growl and or bark and or lunge. So when you see that the dog is scanning and or fixates on a particular trigger, at that point you can interrupt their gaze with a touch cue and redirect their gaze in a different direction, reward them for redirecting their gaze with a reinforcement, and then take appropriate steps to get out of the way, move in a different direction, put more distance between whatever is worrying your dog and the oncoming thing. And it'll give you some maneuvering room in order to be able to help the dog navigate the situation. So that's alternative behavior number 3. Alternative behavior number 4 is an emergency sit-stay, or what I half jokingly call the get behind me Satan cue. And basically what you're doing is you have your dog go on into a sit. It needs to be a reliable sit-stay behind you or to the side or facing you. So you place your body between whatever is worrying the dog, or you step between the dog and whatever's oncoming. And you do that in order to either block the dog's view and or prevent whatever's coming at you from reaching your dog. You want to use your various emergency plans that you should have in place and various skills to handle whatever's coming at you. If it's a person, something along the lines of, my dog's reactive, please stand back. My dog's not friendly, please stay away. or if it's a dog that's charging towards you, something like tossing treats to the side, yelling at it, sit or no or down. And in some situations, you even may want to carry something like citronella spray or body block the oncoming dog. If you're walking your dog on a regular basis, you should plan escape routes so that you know where to take your dog or how to slip behind a car or down an alley or around a corner if you need more space, because you'll find that people and dogs are not overly concerned about you and your dog, and you're going to run into a lot of situations where they won't stay off of you and you're going to need to take evasive action in order to maintain the peace. So an emergency sit stay or get behind me Satan cue, whatever is easy for you to remember. Because what we're trying to avoid, of course, is this. Alternative behavior number 5 is a go to place or go to mat and relax cue. You can use a portable mat, a towel, even a bed if it's easy to transport. I personally like a bath mat. That's pretty easy, non-slip. And you're probably wondering, well, what does that have to do with like leash walking a dog? Or, I mean, why would you do that? Well, because if you've got a reactive dog, say, for example, it's reacting to other people or it's reacting to other dogs, there may well be situations where you have to wait and or be surrounded by dogs or people. For example, the lobby of your vet hospital, or the waiting area for a plane, going on a plane, or if you're traveling while you're waiting for your partner to use the restroom. I mean, there are all kinds of places where you may have to wait and you want to have the dog be able to feel safe and to relax. By taking the mat with you that you constantly use, it basically acts as a visual cue that this is a safe place and that the appropriate behavior is to lie down and hopefully eventually, again, with enough practice, even cause a relaxation response in the dog. I'm sorry I didn't put these on there and I need to load them, but I have, we were fortunate enough to be able to travel to Maine for 2 weeks here in the fall. We took our border collie with us. I have pictures of him using his mat, both in the hotel rooms, as well as various stops along the way, rest stops as we waited for my husband, or if we were waiting to be registered, or what have you. Works fairly well. He also managed to injure his toe, so we were in with the general practice about 3-4 weeks ago. And as we were waiting to be seen, he was resting on his mat in the waiting room, and then again in the exam room while we were waiting for him to be sedated to have his injured foot addressed. And he was able to settle on the mat, do a hip cock, do head down, take a few little treats, and generally be a little bit more at ease because of that training and the visual cue that it stimulates by having that with them. So that's alternative behavior number 5. Alternative behavior number 6 is a look at that cue. So it works on the theory that a dog will be more worried if they are not allowed to look at or track the worrisome thing. So instead of a look at me cue, an alternative would be to teach a look at that cue. This is not something that you want to start just kind of randomly out on the street, tossing food at the dog when he's staring at another dog, or clicking at him when he looks at another dog, but rather it should be taught as a fun game with a neutral object first. So directing the dog's attention to the neutral object when he looks at it, pairing it with a look at that cue, and then rewarding him for looking at that and bringing his attention back to you. So I offer this up with a caveat. With all these alternative behaviors, we have absolutely no research to indicate that one technique or the other is better at preventing or dealing with reactivity in dogs. I present all of these techniques to you as possible tools in your toolbox to be able to work with and deal with your dog. Feedback from my clients tell me that different dogs respond differently to these various alternative behaviors. So some dogs find it easier to sit and stare at their owner's face. Some dogs find it easier to gaze up at their owner. Some dogs find it easier to leave. Some dogs find it easier to look at that and then look back at their owner. So what I would suggest, in fact, recommend, is that you teach all of these behaviors to your dog so that you have options, regardless of the situation, so that you have an appropriate number of choices for alternative behaviors. And that will give you the greatest flexibility at being able to help your dog manage the situation and maintain a calm, relaxed pup. Take a look at the window in front of this dog. We talked about reactivity. Many dogs bark and lunge and scratch at the windows associated with people or dogs or bikes or what have you passing by, and you can see the damage that this guy has done to that window frame. So teaching these alternative behaviors are what are called, they're called foundation skills, right? So basically we're trying to create this foundation for our dogs in order to have alternatives that we can then call on instead of the barking and lunging. Keep in mind that while you're teaching these foundation skills and getting better and better at them, you want to do everything you possibly can to prevent your dog from practicing the unwanted behaviors, be it at home, be it out on walks, be it in the car, be it at the fence line, wherever it may be. You want to prevent the dog from practicing those unwanted behaviors because, as we stated before, the way you get better at something is by doing it over and over and over again. And we don't want them to get better at barking and lunging and pulling and snapping and growling. That is not where we want to go. If every time you take them out, that is happening, basically you're practicing those behaviors on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. And so, yes, they're going to get worse over time. So if at all possible, you want to avoid that situation. And that may mean, if you've got a yard, not walking the dog during the period of time where you're trying to teach those alternative behaviors. If you have no choice but to walk them, then walking them during non-peak hours so that you are less likely to run across potential triggers. If you're talking about a dog that's reactive at the front door or at the window, that means covering up the windows. That means disconnecting your doorbell. That means having Amazon delivered to Amazon locker instead of your front door. There are a lot of different things that you can do in order to cut down on the dog practicing those unwanted behaviors. And you should embrace all of them if you have the expectation of getting this down to a dull roar. You want to determine a gradient. How bad is it? Is there any point in time where my dog won't react or where it isn't a problem or where he isn't triggered? And start with the least troubling scenario. So if my dog is, for example, barking and lunging at people across the street, but he is able to sit and watch and take treats from me when we're sitting on the porch, then that might be your starting point in terms of beginning to practice your skills and initiate desensitization and counter conditioning. And we will talk about that in a little bit more. But basically, you have to practice skills across the gradient. You can't expect the dog For example, if he is reacting to people in your backyard, across the fence line, you can't expect him not to react to people when you're out on a walk and he's on a leash. So you got to start in the house, because that's where he's not reacting, and then gradually increase his bubble and increase the demands on his time. So we want to take baby steps. Those are called approximations. Break this down into little manageable pieces, and gradually over time introduce more challenging situations. You're going to want to establish a training plan and start out with those easy scenarios, working your way up to the moderate, difficult, and hard ones. And I reiterate, just remember that as simple as the sound, it is not easy and requires a lot of repetition in order to get your dog to where you need him to be. So you're going to do the training to decrease reactivity, and that is called desensitization. If the dog is stimulated or triggered by sounds that cause them to be reactive, you can use audio-based therapy like CDs and MP3s and apps. If he is stimulated by seeing things, then you're going to want to implement distance, starting far enough away that the dog's not worried and gradually getting closer and closer to the stimulus of the trigger over time. You want to initiate this therapy treatment when chances of exposure are low. So that's what I'm talking about, practicing avoidance so that they don't practice unwanted behavior or bad behavior. And just realize that even with the best intention and with repeated practice, it's going to take you months to see forward progress. And during that time, the dog should be kept below threshold. Hopefully all the time, but certainly as much of the time as possible. And what do we mean by below threshold? Meaning the dog shouldn't be reacting. And that is the challenge. Again, as I said, for many of my clients, because of the environment, the busy suburban and urban environments that they live in. This desensitization, this gradual exposure and increased intensity of exposure should be done in conjunction with counter conditioning. So that's where your treats come into play, where the dog is being rewarded with appropriate reinforcers. If you do this inappropriately, if you push the dog, if the dog is continuously over threshold, the dog can become sensitized, meaning they are more worried, they are more aroused. So make sure that you know what you're doing, pay attention, follow the protocol, follow the gradient. But take heart in knowing that a number of studies have indicated improved outcomes, especially in response to auditory stimuli, for example, thunderstorms, loud noises, that kind of thing. So there is hope. We do see improvement. It can be done. This will just give you a kind of a little example of how we develop these charts and what they look like. You want to do this for your own dog, customize it and develop that gradient and adhere to a methodical plan to address each of these areas of concern. So in this example, this dog reacts to buses and to kids. They start to react at a distance of approximately 20 to 25 feet. And so we're going to actually start them off at about 30 feet away so that the dog is not reacting, remember, below threshold, and gradually over time reduce that distance so that we can begin that desensitization and counter conditioning protocol and have him practice all those alternative behaviors and reinforce him for calm, quiet behavior in response to those cues. I hope that makes sense for you. Just keep in mind that they've got to be far enough away that they remain calm, they continue to respond to their cues, they're eating their food treats. And if your dog cannot pay attention, will not relax, then you are over threshold and you need to back up so that you don't make things worse. $1 million question. Should you go it alone or should you seek help? How does that work? Well, going it alone, certainly there's more flexibility. You can do it on your schedule. Obviously, it's cheaper, but it can be hard to find appropriate practice locations. It can be hard to find practice partners. So, for example, if you are trying to desensitize and counter condition your dog to chasing squirrels, how do you find a squirrel? I mean, a squirrel that remains stationary, or a squirrel that doesn't charge your dog, or a squirrel that doesn't just like pop up. So those are all hurdles that you have to deal with. And remember, if you don't do this right, you can make your dog worse. What about a class or a learning situation, a trainer situation? Well, certainly that's less flexible because it's got to be, with a trainer, at least a mutually agreeable scheduling time. With a class, it's whenever the class is available. Obviously, it's an investment in terms of cost, but the advantage is that everything is set up for you. And you've got a separate set of eyes on the problem. So coaching and the like. From my end, it's beneficial because it holds me accountable. I tend to have many things pressing on my time. And so without having my dog in a scheduled class, it's really easy to push off his training and say, I'll just do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow turns into several days, and then several days turn into a week, and then a week turns into several weeks. And then it's a month and I haven't done the training that I should be doing. So accountability in some situations, you pay the money, you feel like you have to get your money's worth. And so you show up. So something to think about. We're blessed in this area, again, in the DMV, because we have a number of places that offer reactive dog classes, both in person and online. Your Dog's Friend is one of them, but there are a number of other trainers and organizations that offer good quality reactive dog classes. So it's something to actively consider in terms of getting help in order to have appropriate progress. And then tons and tons of really good positive reinforcement trainers. If you go to the Your Dog's Friend website under resources, there's a list for the DMV area. That's not helpful to any of you that are outside of the area. I know we've got people tuning in from all over, but look for positive reinforcement trainers, and they should hopefully be able to help you. If you need additional assistance with finding an appropriate trainer, certainly reach out to Your Dog's Friend or to myself, and we're happy to provide you with recommendations in terms of where you can find that information. Keep in mind, the basic rule of thumb is that if anything you are doing is making your dog worse, then please, for goodness sake, stop doing it. That's the definition of madness, right? To do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. So if you're not seeing improvement, something's not right, and get some additional help to figure out what the heck is going on in order to take appropriate measures. I will tell you from personal experience, again, from all these clients that I work with, the primary issue or problem tends to be that people have a certain set of expectations and for their dog, and it is very, very, very hard for them to let it go, let their expectations go. So, and or they don't have a choice. So again, if they're living in an apartment, they have to walk their dog and they have to run the gauntlet every single time. They go up and down the stairs or up and down the elevator in order for their poor dog to pee. Or they have it in their head that the dog needs to walk, or that they want to walk, or that the dog should be happy of being around other dogs, that it's part of their social extension, and the owner doesn't want to give that up. So the dog continues to be exposed and the dog continues to get worse. So kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so you actually follow all those suggestions and recommendations, and you've actually tried to limit exposure and it's not working, or heaven forbid, it's getting worse. Now what? Well, there are some additional techniques, some additional add-ons that you can try that may help. For example, if your dog is highly reactive and stays aroused, you could try massage or T-touch to help relax the dog, or help the dog be a little bit more at ease, help them recover faster. T-touch has gotten good press. It's associated with manipulating a dog with long, gentle strokes. And while you're doing it, you can start to introduce the word to relax, chill, whichever one you want to pick, to hopefully start to condition a relaxation response. There's no studies to date on this particular technique in terms of it actually being effective in treatment of behavioral issues or problems. However, we do know that human contact for most dogs is beneficial. They enjoy it. It decreases cortisol level in dogs when they're handled by their owners prior to a stressful event. And it decreases cortisol in shelter dogs when they are massaged and stroked by volunteers. So clearly it has an impact. They've been selected for thousands of years to be our partners and companions, and contact with people is beneficial for most dogs. Pheromones can help reduce noise sensitivity by themselves or in conjunction with other modalities. There's a number of papers to support their use. Basically, a pheromone is a chemical cue that helps signal calming in a particular pet or individual. They are species specific. They are available as diffusers, as collars, wipes, and sprays. Which one you're going to use on your particular pet depends on the environment. If you're talking about a dog that is reactive at the windows and the door, then a diffuser might make sense. If you're talking about a dog that is reactive in the car, then a spray might work best for the car. Or if you're talking about a dog that's reactive on leash, something like a collar. And again, just bear in mind, there are a lot of wannabe products out there, a lot of knockoffs. It is not a product that is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. All of the research done that shows a positive effect has been on the SIVA product, so Adaptil product. So if you're going to spend your money on it, I would not waste your money on any other brand. It just, it'd be like spitting in the wind in terms of any kind of guarantee of efficacy. RAPS, the results are mixed. The mechanism is not known, but the assumption is it's similar to a swaddling action with children. The papers to date that have been done research-wise show no significant response. Examples of two of these products are thundershirts and anti-static capes, but I have some clients that swear by them. They certainly aren't going to do any harm. So it's a no harm, no foul kind of thing. And Thundershirt at least has 100% money back guarantee. So why the heck not? Certainly it's something that you can try and it may help. There are lots of supplements available on the market. The ones that I would put the most emphasis on are Zilkene and Angstitane. Zilkene is a milk protein derivative called alpha-casazepine, and it has been shown to reduce anxiety in a variety of species, but there's no specific papers or research associated with how effective it might be for reactivity. However, might well be worth considering. The other product is a green tea extract, which contains L-theanine. It is a product called Angstitane. There's a single study on efficacy on that one. Again, nothing looking at reactivity or arousal or impulse control. It's all anxiety-based, but again, might be worth trying. The other ones that are out there, like Composure Pro and Composure, no studies on efficacy for that. Soloquin, there was a single study, but again, nothing on reactivity or arousal. So take it with a grain of salt. These are not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, again, because they're supplements. So if you're going to buy a supplement, I would, again, advise you to stick with brand name products and not just buy something random. off of eBay. Diets. I often am asked if diet will make any difference in a dog's behavior. There's not a lot of information out there that indicates significant benefits to behavior associated with dietary change. We do know that insulin production is stimulated by carbohydrates, so good old carb loading, and that can actually increase serotonin levels in the brain. So any of you that have gone on a good old-fashioned chocolate binge prior to final exams will know exactly what I'm talking about. There is a single product out there called Royal Canin Calm that was found to reduce anxiety, but was not tested specifically on reactivity. It may be well worth a try on small yappy guys because it has been found to reduce anxiety. I've listed the papers there, but please be aware that this product is only effective in dogs up to about 30, 35 pounds because the concentration of the active ingredients, the dog, if it were a bigger dog, they couldn't eat enough to have an appropriate concentration of those active ingredients, which are the L-tryptophan and the milk protein alpha-casazepine that we talked about earlier when we talked about supplements. Short-term medications, if it comes to that, there's a whole slew of them that your veterinarian or veterinary behaviorist would choose from, including benzodiazepines like doggy Valium, which affects neurotransmitter called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. There are the serotonin norepinephrine antagonist reuptake inhibitors like trazodone. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that one. Alpha-2 agonists that block norepinephrine, such as Cilio gel. Some of you may use that for your pups, or clonidine, and then the beta blockers like propranolol. So these short-term medications, in general, take 1 to 2 hours to kick in and have a duration of about somewhere around 6 hours, 8 hours maximum. So they're often used prior to stressful events and or prior to walks, for example. But the hassle associated with them, again, is that you have to give them in advance. So normally they take 1 to 2 hours to kick in, and that the duration of action is relatively short, maximum 8 hours in my hands. If, however, you're not having to deal with a situation on a regular basis, I don't know, like having visitors in the home and your dog is reactive to visitors, then that might make sense. I bring that up as Thanksgiving holidays loom on the horizon. Long-term medications are, the two big families are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. So the one that most people are familiar with is fluoxetine, and people brand is Prozac, doggy brand is Reconcile. And then the other family is tricyclic acid depressants, TCAs, and the one that most people are familiar with in this group be clomipramine, the brand name for dogs is Clomicalm, or amitriptyline, which most people are familiar with by the brand name Elavil. So that gives you some idea about these long-term medications. Long-term medications take a while to kick in, 6 to 8 weeks to show full effect. And the purpose of the medication is to increase serotonin in the brain, which is supposedly the feel-good neurotransmitter, to raise the dog's threshold so that they're less reactive, and to basically cut down on neural firing so that they're not so easily over-aroused and anxious. Some additional advice that I can give you in terms of dealing with these reactive dogs: avoid, prevent. Remember, we do not want them practicing unwanted behaviors. If possible, distract them. If possible, redirect them. Bear in mind that your behavior may have an impact. We don't want your behavior to be a cue that bad things are going to happen. So as best you can, try to remain calm and relaxed. And typically, it's the tightening up on the leash and grabbing the dog. And as soon as you do that, they're looking, wondering what's coming down the pike. Why they need to be worried, right? And then just so that you're aware, this very interesting study just came out, actually in the past month or so, indicating that the more frazzled and worried the handler was, the more worried the dog was. So being calm, taking deep breaths, do some meditation and settling responses for yourself in order to provide the best support possible for your dog. I bring this out because I mentioned the avoidance aspect of it. Again, we just came back this fall from a trip to Maine, and I have to tell you, I was appalled. We went to Acadia National Park there. There were dogs everywhere, and people not managing their dogs appropriately. So my dog is not reactive, but he could easily have become reactive in a very short period of time associated with how inappropriately people were handling and managing their dogs in those situations. In fact, to the point where we actually changed our vacation plans because it was so bad. And I was so concerned about what I was seeing. This is just a clip from our local newspaper about a flower and garden show. And in this situation, dogs were prohibited. And yet the complaint was that when they went to this show, they counted 27 dogs. People had brought different individuals had brought 27 dogs to a event where dogs were prohibited. So just bear in mind, people are not going to care that your dog is reactive. They're not going to give you space. They're not going to, they're not going to care. And so the burden is on you to practice avoidance, to find appropriate places to take your dog, and to be aware that it is not reasonable for you to expect to go to some of these busy places, and that people will keep their dogs off of your dog, because they will not. Prevention. Can you prevent reactivity from happening? Yeah. Appropriate socialization between the ages of 4 to 14 weeks can help. Notice the word appropriate. So again, a recent paper came out that indicated that dogs that had supposedly undergone socialization may actually be more likely to be reactive than dogs that hadn't gone through socialization. And by when I say so-called appropriate socialization, meaning that they've gone to puppy classes. So clearly, whatever was happening in those puppy classes was not appropriate. And the dogs were either getting frightened or over-aroused or overstimulated, and that made it more likely that they would be reactive in the long run. So appropriate, emphasis on the word appropriate. Having positive experiences with other dogs up to 2 years of age. So avoiding doggy daycare where there's 40 dogs jumping on the other dog, avoiding dog parks where they're getting chased by 40 other dogs, smaller groups, appropriately behaved, appropriate owner intervention. Teach basic skills regardless. Remember, there's a reason why those are called foundation skills. It doesn't matter if your dog is reactive or not. We really would like it that every dog we have, it has those basic skills. Again, remember my reference to the Border Collie, traveling with the Border Collie, taking the Border Collie to the vet hospital. All those skills were extremely important, very useful with or without reactivity. Avoid iffy situations, as I mentioned, farmers markets, wineries. Don't take your dog to a bistro. Just don't do it. Because people allow their dogs to run amok, and then your dog pays the consequences. And last but not least, I think all flexi leads should be banned. My dog got goosed in Maine twice by dogs on flexi leads because the people couldn't be bothered with actually putting a brake on the lead. It was infuriating. Here are some reading materials for you that would potentially be helpful. Patricia McConnell's Feisty Fido, which is a small, relatively slim volume dedicated to leash reactivity and working with leash reactive dogs. Boggs' book, The Fired Up, Frantic, and Freaked Out, is pretty
Okay. There are a lot of questions. And I wanted to tell you that CBD didn't come up until the last 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. That's different.
I thought we'd get through the whole thing.
Yeah.
So let's start there now that I brought it up. Dr. Sinn did do a webinar for us on CBD that you can look at. I don't know if there's been any new research since your webinar, or if you want to give like a 5-sentence summary.
I can give a quick synopsis. So the Food and Drug Administration, in its wisdom, has decided that they will address CBD as a supplement, not as a drug. So that means that there is no particular oversight of CBD in the American market. Consequently, when you purchase a CBD product, you're reliant on the producer, the manufacturer, in terms of the quality of that product, again, because there is no oversight. If you're going to dabble in CBD products, you need to make sure that there is a quality analysis certificate on the producer's website that indicates that it does in fact contain what they're claiming it contains, and that it doesn't contain anything that you don't want it to contain, such as heavy metals or pesticides. If you can't find that quality analysis certificate, do not buy the product. Do not buy the product. A lot of them come from China. And as you know, we've had issues with Chinese products in other areas as well. So there have been real concerns with high lead and high pesticide contents in these. In terms of the research that Deborah indicated, there have been several pretty good quality research projects that have looked at the efficacy of CBD as a supplement, or I should say an augmentation drug for control of epilepsy in dogs, and that looks extremely promising. There was one study done on, I take that back, 2 studies done on arthritis in dogs, and it does appear to provide some pain relief. The one study that was done on anxiety in dogs, it was not effective. So no response to treatment of anxiety. Keep in mind that very specific dosage was used. It was used for a specific period of time. It may well be that that wasn't the right dosage or the right amount of time, right? We know from research in people that CBD has a wide variety of effects, and it can be extremely useful in some situations, but we just don't have that research yet to know what will work in our dogs. Bear in mind, if your dog is on other medications, that CBD interferes and or affects metabolic pathways for other drugs. And so it can cause problems, either increasing the amount of whatever other drug your dog is on or decreasing the amount of whatever other drug your dog is on. So it's not benign. So that's about the best that I can do. Again, in the behavior world, there has been no research that would indicate at this point in time that it does much of anything. Client feedback for people who have chosen to use CBD indicates some people swear by it, and other people they got bupkis from it. No response whatsoever. So here we are, clear as mud.
Okay. There are a few questions about socialization that have come up. And I'm going to lump them all together and you can do what you want with them.
Okay.
One is, what is the safe way to socialize a puppy, especially before being fully vaccinated? Another is, does over-socialization cause reactivity? And the third is, what do you do if you've adopted an older dog? How do you, quote unquote, socialize them to new situations? Enjoy.
Yeah, those are all great questions. So the risk of a behavioral issue is much higher than the risk of a medical issue with a puppy. So if a puppy has had any vaccinations at all, once it's received its first round of vaccinations, at that point in time, you should be getting the puppy out and about and starting to expose the puppy to people, places, and things in its environment that it's going to have to deal with on a day-to-day basis so that it's adequately socialized or adequately exposed. Do not wait for the puppy to have received all of its shots, because by that time, the socialization window will have slammed shut and you will have a problem. So as soon as the puppy has its first set of shots on board, you can start taking them out and about. Proper socialization means that it is a positive experience for the puppy, that the puppy is having a good time, that it wants to go out and about, that it likes what's happening. Having it surrounded by 20 kids and flipped on its back and dangled by its hind legs and squeezed, probably not so good. Having it dropped, having it be scared by large vehicles or large cars, not so good. So my point is that the experiences have to be positive for the puppy in order for it to be a good experience, so that it becomes happy with being around these people, places, and things that it's going to deal with every day of its life. In terms of if you have an older dog, what do? Socialization window in dogs is very, very narrow. It's 4 to 14 weeks of age. When behavior people talk about socialization, that is the period of time where a puppy can be exposed to, say, 1 or 2 women, have a good experience, all women are great. Exposed to 1 or 2 men, have a good experience, men are great. 1 or 2 kids, kids are great, so on and so forth. Once they leave that period of time, they do not generalize as easily. And in that situation, if your dog is normal, you can increase the size of their bubble by taking them out and about, assuming that the experience is either neutral or positive. They will habituate, meaning they will get used to what it is that they're being exposed to. And gradually their window will get bigger over time, right? Their bubble will get bigger over time. If your dog is afraid, if your dog is worried, if your dog is anxious, you cannot habituate them. They will not get used to it. You have to desensitize them and counter condition them, which means gradual, moderated exposure paired with positive things, treats, pets, play, so that when I see a stranger, I think treats, pets, play, not, oh my God, there's a stranger coming towards me. simply shoving the dog at the stranger does not count as socializing them. That doesn't work. And in fact, if you aren't paying attention to your dog's body language, how stressed the dog is, how worried the dog is, and you continue to push and force the dog to interact, people ignore the signals, the dog may finally get to the point where it feels it doesn't have a choice and starts to react aggressively. Again, if I had $10 for every client who comes to me and says, my dog used to be fine with strangers, and now he's barking and lunging at them. And I ask them, well, what did the dog used to do with strangers? What it used to do around strangers? And he goes, well, it would just sit there or it would just lie there. Well, did it approach the stranger? No. Did it seek contact from the stranger? No. Did it have loose body language with the stranger? No. Dog wasn't fine. The dog was never fine. The dog was shut down, and the people continued to push and force those interactions on the dog. And over time, the dog figured the only way to keep those scary things away was to start to growl and bark and lunge. And guess what? That usually works, usually. So I hope that gives you an idea about working with older dogs. Often an older dog will be receptive to taking social cues from another well-adjusted, trained older dog. So clients often tell me that if a stranger, for example, is with another dog and the dog they're working with is dog friendly, that they will be more accepting of situations and people if another dog is present. So that's something else to think about as a way to help. Is that all of it, Deborah?
Well, someone also asked about, what was this socialization question? The fear period, and is there a secondary fear period that would affect socialization?
Yeah, so there's some question or some debate about whether there's a secondary fear period or not. So depending on what you read, depending on what you look at, there's a suggestion that maybe there's a secondary fear period around 9 months of age, something like that. But there's not a lot of research or literature to back that up. It's just kind of like personal observation or personal feedback. When you look at the research that's been done in service dogs, their behavioral characteristics tend to be pretty stable over time. So if you've got a dog that is fearful at 6 months, chances are it's going to be fearful at 9 months, it's going to be fearful at 12 months, it's going to be fearful at 18 months. So if you see behavior that is concerning at an early age, that they don't grow out of it. They don't tend to, it doesn't tend to go away, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. All right, this is a question we hear a lot. My dog is highly reactive on leash, but is a model student at daycare.
Yep, that happens. So it tells you that that your dog probably has no particular issues in terms of social skills or anything like that, that he's not scared of dogs per se. So then the question is why is the dog reactive on leash? And there's a number of reasons why that might be. Typically, it's because they become frustrated on leash because they can't greet or they can't play, or they become over aroused when they're on leash and there's no good way to spread out that arousal. So they bark and lunge. Or they may have had an unfortunate or traumatic event when they're on leash. So when they're on leash, they feel cornered or trapped, and consequently they're on edge and are bark and lunge because of that. So those would be the most likely motivations in that situation. And I often ask myself or wonder, because I'm all about seeing the video. But if your dog at daycare is going and running and running and running and running and playing and playing and playing and playing and bowling over the other dogs and just go, 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 all the time, and that's all the dog's doing, then you can understand why when the dog's placed on leash, he now has a problem because of the difference in the contrast. And that his behavior may or may not be appropriate at daycare. So you need to look at the videos, you need to look at the interactions, and the hallmark of appropriate social interactions in dogs is reciprocal behavior. So interacting with the dog, I play, I poke, other dog, play bows, I back off, you play and poke, I play bow, you back off, I play and poke. So reciprocal behavior. If you're not seeing reciprocal behavior, the dog is not socially appropriate.
Okay. I mentioned in last week's webinar too, but another thing about daycare, Robin Bennett is a daycare expert, and she always mentions that your dog may love being at daycare for an hour. Maybe. Yeah. But that doesn't mean they want to be there for 6 hours.
Right.
So that's another thing to keep in mind. A dog walker said that it seems to her that dogs are more reactive to intact males. Know anything about that? Not sure? Or did you freeze?
Get that feedback per se. My dog is intact. The border collie is intact. I haven't noticed dogs being more reactive to him compared to anybody else, unless it's another intact male. And then, depending on the one-upsmanship that may happen, there may be some fireworks associated with that, and how intense the two of them might get.
Okay. Here's a really interesting question. If a dog likes other dogs generally, but has leash reactivity to dogs, should you try to make sure that the dog has opportunities off leash to socialize with other dogs?
That's a really interesting question. Again, it's really unfortunate that we can't put them on the couch and analyze them, right? Because when a dog is reactive like that, we don't know what the underlying motivation is. But my assumption would be, if the dog has an opportunity to interact with other dogs off leash in an appropriate manner, there's certainly no way that would harm their behavior on leash. And it might help it if the dog then develops a history of positive interactions with other dogs. Maybe that might help temper their leash reactivity. That's just an assumption or supposition on my part. I don't have any hard information or data that I can give you that says, positive play will decrease leash reactivity.
But
great project, though.
Project for you.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. The other thing, this might be a good time to mention Sniff Spot for those of you who don't know about it. It's sniffspot.com, and you rent space in people's yards or other property that they own. And if you know that your dog gets along with certain other dogs and you live in an apartment or you don't know where they can play, you can rent Sniff Spot space for a certain time and they can play there. And that could be a real lifesaver for some of you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Deborah, because for sure, that has been a lifeline for many, many clients. So that is an awesome resource to have.
Is that national, do you know?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, good. Okay. Here's another interesting question. Her dog is reactive, like reacting to other dogs in the lobby of their apartment.
Yeah.
And she's wondering whether these methods work when the reactivity is in the dog's own territory.
It can, yes, it does. It will work, but territorial behavior, if that is what is happening, adds another special layer to the behavior for sure. So there are some dogs that are territorial, meaning they are protective of their home turf or home space. And the way that we differentiate that or determine that is that the dog is reactive on home ground, but not reactive away from home ground, or less reactive away from home ground. And bear in mind that as city dwellers or suburban dwellers, we tend to walk the same paths over and over again, because let's face it, you only have so much time during the day. And so consequently, X path takes 30 minutes. So that's where you walk. If you walked in any other direction or added any other loops to it, it would take more time or less time. And so we tend to follow those same paths time and time again. Your dog may well start to assume that that regularly walked path is his or her territory. And yes, girl dogs can be territorial, for sure. So the question in terms of territorial behavior versus some other cause for leash reactivity is the dog territorial, is the dog reactive only on its home base, at its home base, home turf, or is the dog also reactive when it's away from its home base or home turf? The answer is only when it's on its home ground, away from home ground, the dog's great. And what the dog is showing is territorial behavior, and that behavior may be unwanted behavior, but it is not necessarily abnormal behavior, and it can be more difficult to modulate. It takes a lot of practice to help a dog that's territorial, because as far as it's concerned, the behavior is it's a normal behavior for them, just an unwanted one for us.
Okay, I have two questions that don't sound related, but in my mind they are. One is, my dog responds to stay reinforced with cheese.
Yep.
Have other suggestions. And the other is, I taught my dog a look at me cue, and he can do it in very different situations. But in stressful situations, or when he's reactive, he has no interest in me or my cues.
Yeah.
And the reason I link them together is that both of them are requiring that your dog do something while there's a situation going on that he's not that comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. So a couple things here. One is that there are lots of different reinforcers out there that may be very, very high value. You just have to kind of search for them or look for them. So I can give you some examples. Super high value might be, for example, salmon flavored cream cheese. That's a very popular one. That usually will get most dogs' attention. Anchovy paste, liverwurst. So you need to try and be creative in terms of finding a reinforcer that's high enough value to get your dog's attention. If you go through all of that and you can't find anything that holds their attention, then the dog is over threshold, is being overstimulated, and you need to find a way to increase distance or decrease the sound or minimize the speed or modulate the numbers. I mean, something to make the exposure less intense for the dog so that they continue to be able to cope. If you can't, despite all your efforts, alter the environment enough to make that happen, and you can't find any kind of a reinforcer that the dog will take outside of your home at an appropriate distance and all that, then that's an indication that medication's needed. Because if you've done it right, the dog should be taking a reinforcer. He should be able to concentrate. It tells you that it's too much for the dog, and the dog needs medical intervention, needs some help in order to be able to manage.
The other thing I'm wondering about, both of these gave me the impression that the dog was still being told either to stay or look at me.
Mm-hmm.
The other dog was getting closer and closer.
Yeah.
As opposed to,
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the hardest thing for a reactive dog to do is to sit still while something worrisome approaches. That's the hardest thing. I mean, think about it. Like, it's dark outside. Someone sketchy is coming at you, and they're getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and you're going to get more and more and more and more and more worried, right? So that's the hardest thing that you can ask your dog to do. Remember when I showed that emergency sit stay slide, that was to be done when you have, for example, a dog off leash charging you, and there's no way in heck you're going to outrun it. That's not the preferred method when you're out walking or out doing your thing, because that's asking a lot of your dog. Motion is easier for them. Moving away from something is easier for them. So Deborah brings up a good point that if in those situations you are asking your dog to be stationary, then one of the responses to that may help would be to not ask your dog to be stationary and instead use that "let's go" or "we're out of here" cue, or with the "look at me" cue, then ask them to step behind a car or around a corner or behind a bush or something that helps to increase distance and or provides a barrier for the dog to take pressure off the dog so that it is able to cope.
And there go my dogs. And someone mentioned that's why they like using touch, because it keeps the dog moving.
Yep.
And it's easier than having them sit still when they're
still. Yeah.
Someone asked about citronella spray. Other people answered what it was. My only experience with it is that it's got to be directly in the dog's face, which is hard when dogs are, fighting around and we tried it.
Yeah, the advantage is that if you happen to get blowback or your dog gets blowback, it won't floor the two of you. The disadvantage is that it may not floor the attacking dog, right? So that's the disadvantage of that. Spray shield might be a little bit more effective, something that's got some, a pepper base to it. But boy, be careful where you point it, because if it gets on you or gets on your dog, y'all are going to experience it as well.
Right. And someone else said that she put her dog in one of the front clip harnesses and her dog got right out of it. Well, I assume that's probably a fit issue, but other people chimed in with what harnesses they like. She wanted to know if you have any brands that you particularly like.
So the ones that I usually suggest people start with are freedom harnesses and the balance harnesses. The balance one in particular has more points of adjustment or attachment. So usually you can find a good fit in that situation. And then if your dog is Houdini-like, you may well want to consider a martingale or a flat buckle collar and a carabiner attached to the collar and to the front attachment ring, so that you don't ever have to worry about the dog backing out and getting away.
Okay. And someone else had an excellent idea. She was talking about her dog being in daycare, but that there are daycares that have options for dogs that aren't dog social, rather than throwing the dog in a room with 30 other dogs. And she suggested that people look at sites, call the places, and they can end up with something that works for them, just like she did.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep. Someone else mentioned, is timing more important than which technique you use?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, I would say that that's accurate. So any of those techniques, as we mentioned, can be effective. That's not the issue or problem, but proper use of the technique, so proper application and timing, definitely make a difference. So I think that's a very, very good point. And it allows me to segue back again to the comment about if you try any of these things and for any reason you think it's making things worse, for goodness sakes, please stop and regroup. At the very least, ask for help if you're concerned.
Is there a point where sitting and watching the trigger is bad, like for more than 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 60 seconds?
Oh, so good question. So I think the best way to explain that is that if the dog, again, remember we're trying to be under threshold. So under threshold doesn't mean having the dog sitting beside you rigid, fixedly staring at something, sharply snorking down food. The dog is over threshold in that situation. It's true, dog's not barking and lunging, but that would indicate that the dog is very, very worried and is probably too close to whatever it is that you're working with. So ideally, the dog would be distractible. So it's looking at whatever it is that is concerned, but he's also able to disengage and take some food from you with or without a cue, rather than just fixedly staring at something for 20, 60, 120 seconds without ever breaking eye contact.
This is my own question. Isn't it even more important that they be able to do it without a cue, so that you're not constantly cueing them to do?
Yeah, so that would be an indication, right, that the dog is actually relaxed, because it's not requiring any cue for him to look around and look for food and try and mug your treat pouch, and right, as compared to look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah.
And the dog's like, oh yeah, I need to look at her. Oh yeah, I need to look at her. So yeah, good point.
Here is a question dear to my heart. My dog is reactive to children, including my 8-year-old grandchild. I told Dr. Sinn my 6-year-old grandchild's coming into town today, and my reactive dog would love to bite him. Is having a child in the house with the dog contained with a leash or in a crate a possible way to get a dog accustomed to a child?
It depends on how the dog's reacting, right? So if the dog is able to be relaxed and at ease, then yes, because the child's going to be around. It gives you an opportunity to practice rewarding calm, quiet behavior. Nothing bad's happening. So yes, that would help increase the size of the dog's bubble. If the dog is in its crate, staring, hackles up, snarling, no. If the dog is on leash and not able to relax, and the only thing that's keeping it from going after the child is the fact that it's on leash, not good. So in those situations, the dog should be removed from the situation. And if the dog cannot settle in the bedroom or the basement or wherever it's at, then it needs medication so that it can go and take a nice nap and have a spa day versus sitting and glaring and glowering and becoming more worried and more aroused associated with the presence of the child.
You just reminded me, I need to go get the trazodone. So answer this next one slowly.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. If progress takes at least 6 weeks, why would you be reducing the distance to the trigger every week?
Oh, you might not. That was just an example. I just, to show people that it was done in a stair-step manner, you shouldn't reduce the distance to the trigger unless the dog is relaxed at the distance you're currently working at, however long that takes, a day, a month, a week. So that chart was simply an example of how you can stair step it down. But the assumption is that the dog is at ease at the current distance that you're working at before you reduce the distance further. So thank you for asking that question if it wasn't clear in the presentation itself.
Okay, that was good timing. Gave me time to put up the baby gate before they get here.
All right. So are we ending it here then, Deborah?
What time is it? No, there are a few. I may skip some of these, but one person suggested that sniffing the ground, like if you throw treats on the ground, or chewing are calming behaviors. And well, yeah, we'll leave that there. Any comments? Are they both correct?
I'm not quite sure what it's in reference to. So
if you're looking for ways to calm your dog,
yes,
you like throw treats on the ground so they can sniff the ground.
Yes. So that's another possible alternative behavior is a find it cue and with a treat toss to get them engaged, right, in searching rather than seeking the whatever it is that they're after. So yes, that would work. And then obviously for redirection, you could also use something like a lick-it mat or a chew toy, a long-lasting chew, a frozen Kong, that kind of thing, for sure.
Do you have anything to say about probiotics affecting?
Yes, there is a probiotic on the market, Purina Calming Care. It is marketed as reducing anxiety. We haven't seen anything brilliant with it. So some clients feel like it might help. A lot of them feel like it hasn't done anything. So it's there. We know that the gut-brain axis is real, but we just haven't seen substantive benefits yet from the products that are currently on the market.
Okay, here is a question I've heard over and over, so I'd like to hear the answer. When my dog sees another dog, he gets reactive, but when he is allowed on leash to slowly get close to the dog, he stops and wants to play. How can I use this in training?
Yeah, so, clearly with that dog, with your dog, at least the one that we're talking about in this situation, the primary problem is frustration. So the dog, if it could actually get to the other dog and manage its impulse control and its frustration, the outcome would be good, but it's basically getting over aroused and frustrated in the process. So any kind of exercises that work on impulse control would be beneficial. So something like a tug game, tug, release, that kind of thing. And then teaching the dog something like a go say hi cue, where the dog goes to approach, and as the dog approaches, you then call the dog back and reward him for returning to you, and then gradually narrow the distance down so that you've got kind of a going out, coming back, going out, coming back, going out, coming back until it makes contact without the staring at, trying to get out, getting frustrated, getting aroused, lunging, barking fiasco that ensues. So that would be probably the easiest way to handle that interaction or that behavior.
Okay, this next question sounds like it applies only to her, but I think it's probably a little bit broader. The two dogs who live next door get right up to the fence, link, and that's my dogs. I covered most of the fence with tarp 2 years ago. I took down about 15 feet of the tarp as I thought my dogs were assimilated. Now they react every time they see the other dogs. Is this reinforcing behavior that I don't, or should I put the tarp back up?
Tarp needs to go back up. And clearly, right? Because now the dogs are reacting. Remember what we said, if anything makes it worse, then for goodness sake, stop. So put the tarp back up. A lot of my clients have ended up using a double fence system where they do a sight blocking situation like you've described with a tarp or visual barrier of some sort, put plantings in between, and then something like a less permanent type chicken wire fence or something like that to keep the dogs off of the fence line in order to decrease that issue or that problem. It can be a real hassle for sure.
And then there's a question about how to change reactivity if the dog is only reactive to certain dogs. This is the dog reacts only to 3 schnauzers that walk the same route and acts like she wants to kill them, because we sometimes can't avoid them.
Yeah, I understand. So, I mean, a lot in that situation, it depends on how much time and effort you want to put into it, right? Because you could, for example, practice desensitization counter conditioning to a schnauzer stuffed dog. You could try and contact those owners and see if they'd be willing to work on desensitization and counter conditioning at a distance. You could see if you could track down somebody else with schnauzers and see if you could work with them. And then honestly, practicing all the techniques that we've talked about so that they are fail-safe behaviors with the hope that it will hopefully generalize and apply to the situation with the schnauzers. That's the best that I can suggest, or the best that I can do for you, because that's very, very specific. Usually when clients tell me about that, it's because the other dogs are reactive and they set the client's dog off, or they've had a bad experience with the dogs charging them or going after them, and now there's enmity, right, between them. So how much work do you want to put into it for those specific dogs is the question.
And what about dogs who are in the car, and if the husband is there, they're fine with dogs and people walking by. If the wife is there, they're not.
So that sounds like a dog that's showing resource guarding or possessive aggression.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
And they're guarding the wife. I assume the wife is the preferred person. So in those situations, that's a whole nother ball of wax in terms of working with the dog, in terms of the motivation. And I apologize, but I don't know that we've got the time or the bandwidth
No,
right
we
now to
don't.
talk about resource guarding and possessive aggression and how to deal with that.
We have a handout on our website, and we had a webinar on resource guarding that you can find on our YouTube channel. And I suppose, you know, it'd be nice if it did.
So Deborah, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up? We're 2 hours in here.
Well, here is a good last question.
Okay.
Everybody else, get your questions in earlier next time. There is a punishment-based trainer who says he can fix reactivity in 30 minutes. How do you help people understand that even if the dog isn't barking, the dog is not comfortable?
Yeah, I hear you. So two things help. One is to help and encourage people to learn more about dog body language so that they are clear about what signals the dog is showing in terms of their behavior. So if you have a video of a happy dog on leash, bouncing along, tail up, ears up, loose body language, and a dog that's been trained most likely with a shock collar, they will not look the same. And highlighting those differences, showing them that the dogs that are trained this way clearly are indicating that they are unhappy, may help. And then the other is to talk about underlying motivation and talking about how punishing a symptom, because reactivity is a symptom, does nothing about the underlying motivation for the reactivity. So think about it this way. If I were a frightened person or a frightened child, and I said to my spouse or I said to my parent, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, and I got shocked for it, I would stop saying I'm scared, but I'm still scared. So it does nothing about absolutely nothing about the underlying motivation, none whatsoever. The problem is they've just cut off the vocal part of it, the verbal part of it, right? So now the dog's not giving any outward signal or sign. And these are the dogs that then can explode or erupt when they're pushed too hard, again, because there's been nothing done about the underlying motivation. So if the dog is afraid, but now it's been punished for growling or barking or lunging, and so it's sitting there and it's quote unquote fine, and somebody approaches, assists an approach, gets closer, gets closer, gets closer, gets closer. Remember, I can't bark, I can't lunge, I can't growl, but the thing's getting closer and closer and closer. Those are the dogs that lunge and bite without warning because they've been punished for warning. And that's a really scary place to be. So I think when you explain it to people that way, when you give the child analogy, the child being shocked for saying I'm scared, that it has an impact for them and it makes them think. It's not a comfortable thought, but it's an accurate one. And so that might be the best way to make an impact. And I feel bad for people with reactive dogs because what we would really like, of course, is we'd like to fix it and be able to walk with our dogs. And there isn't a quick fix. It takes a lot of practice. And I've had, again, many clients say, I didn't sign up for this to become a professional dog trainer. And I hear you. I hear you. But you know what? That's how a lot of us got our start. And it is definitely a journey. It is not a quick fix or an immediate an immediate cure. So I hope that helps. Just some suggestions.
I just read through your questions, and almost everyone, if you look at our YouTube channel, you'll see webinars that are related to your questions. If you look at behavior issues on our website, you'll see handouts that are related. If you still have the question after that, you can contact us, and we'll answer. That's the answer.
We'll help one way or another.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sinn.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.